My Weird School, Book Number 10. Mr. Docker is Off His Rocker. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Palott. Chapter 9. Spying on Mr. Docker. Spying on people is cool. My sister Amy and I spy on our parents all the time. We tiptoe around and hide behind the furniture so we can write down their conversations. I always hope to hear good secrets, but all my parents ever talk about is whose turn it is to take out the garbage and stuff like that. They're the most boring parents in the history of the world. On Saturday, me, Michael, Andrea, and Emily rode our bikes to Ryan's house. Ryan was all ready. He had sunglasses for all of us because spies always wear sunglasses. He had his milk carton periscope. Ryan even had one of his famous stink bombs. "Okay," he said, "let's synchronize our potato clock." "What does that mean?" Emily asked. "I don't know," Ryan said, "but they always synchronize their watches in spy movies." We tiptoed down the street to Mr. Docker's house. It looked pretty normal. You would never know a mad scientist lived there. We hid behind a tree across the street. Ryan looked in the periscope. "Can you see anything?" Andrea asked. "No. Maybe he's not home," said Emily. "We should go." "Let's get closer," I said. We tiptoed across the street and sneaked up Mr. Docker's driveway. "If he comes home right now, we'll be in big trouble," Emily said. "Don't be a baby," I said. "Come on, let's peek in the window." I looked in the window. I was hoping to see Mr. Docker swapping brains with someone, but there was nobody inside. "He's not home," Andrea said. "Let's get out of here." Oops. I turned around. Ryan dropped the stink bomb in the middle of Mr. Docker's driveway. It broke open and the stink got out. "Ew, it's disgusting," Andrea said, holding her nose. "Ugh, I think I'm gonna die," I said. I didn't think things could get any worse, but they did. Suddenly, the garage door opened. Mr. Docker was standing there. He had a knife in his hand. We all screamed. "He's crazy!" Andrea shouted. "Run for your life!" Chapter 10. The Spudmobile. That crazy mad scientist, Mr. Docker, was 4 feet away, and he was holding a big, sharp knife. I looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Michael. Michael looked at me. Andrea and Emily ran away. "Are you going to swap our brains?" I asked Mr. Docker. "What are you doing with that knife?" asked Ryan. "I'm peeling potatoes," Mr. Docker said. "What's that smell?" "I made a stink bomb," Ryan said. "Excellent," said Mr. Docker. "I'm glad you're doing science projects at home. Welcome to my laboratory." We looked around Mr. Docker's garage. It was filled with lots of test tubes, jars of chemicals, and other stuff. But the thing that stood out was his car. It didn't have a metal covering like a normal car. The whole thing was covered with potatoes. "What's that?" Michael asked. "You're just in time," Mr. Docker said. "I've been working on it for months, and it's finally done. Behold, the Spudmobile!" The car was covered with rows and rows of potatoes. Each potato had wires attached to it that went to the engine. It was the weirdest looking car I ever saw. "You built a car powered by potatoes?" Ryan asked. "It can also run on pickles," Mr. Docker replied. "But I thought a pickle-mobile would sound silly. Do you want to ride?" "Sure," we said as we climbed in. It has that new potato car smell, said Michael. What kind of mileage does this thing get? Asked Ryan, who knows a lot about cars. About 5 miles per potato, said Mr. Docker. He turned the key. The engine started up with a quiet hum. Mr. Docker pulled out of the driveway. It really worked. Maybe someday all cars will run on potatoes, Mr. Docker said. They won't have gas stations anymore. They'll have potato stations. And if you're out driving and you get hungry, I said, you can eat your car. The possibilities are endless, said Mr. Docker. We could heat our houses with potatoes. Someday we'll have potato-powered computers and TV sets. They could have potato-powered toys, I suggested, potatoes not included. Mr. Docker let out one of his cackling laughs. That's when I realized that he's not an evil mad scientist at all. Mr. Docker is the coolest nerd in the history of the world. We turned the corner, and there were Andrea and Emily on the sidewalk. They were staring at the potato car with their mouths wide open, like they were looking at a ghost. Check it out, Ryan shouted out the window. We're riding in the Spudmobile. Power to the potato, shouted Michael. Na 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 boo boo on you, I shouted. Chapter 11. My buzzing, bubbling brain. I could hardly sleep that night. My brain wouldn't stop thinking about Mr. Docker and his amazing potato car. Lots of why questions were buzzing around in my head. I decided that science isn't nerdy after all. Science is cool. I don't want to be a football player anymore. When I grow up, I want to be a scientist like Mr. Docker. By the time I got to school, my brain was bubbling over with why questions. Miss Daisy, I asked as soon as she walked in the class, why do some people have curly hair and other people have straight hair? Why is grass green? Why is it called a pair of pants when you only have one of them? I have no idea, said Miss Daisy, who doesn't know anything. I'm surprised to hear you asking all these questions, AJ. Didn't you say science was for nerds? Cool nerds, I said. We have science this morning, she said. Maybe Mr. Docker can answer your questions. I couldn't wait to get to the science room. Mr. Docker was in there, eating potato salad. Mr. Docker, I asked, why don't eggs break under a chicken? How come heavy bolts can float, but light rocks sink? Do cats have belly buttons? Whoa, said Mr. Docker. Slow down, AJ. Why does my dad have hair growing out of his ears? I asked. How do microwave ovens work? What would happen if I dropped a watermelon off the Empire State Building? AJ, I think I'm getting a headache, said Mr. Docker. Where do babies come from, Mr. Docker? Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Why is water wet? How many toothpicks can you make out of one tree? That's enough, AJ, said Mr. Docker. Why do clocks go clockwise, Mr. Docker? I asked. Why do leaves change color? Why is ice slippery? If you don't milk a cow, will the cow explode? Stop, AJ, shouted Mr. Docker. Why are bubbles round, Mr. Docker? Why do we sneeze? What's the difference between jelly and jam? How come when cartoon characters run off cliffs, they don't fall right away? Why do grown-ups like vegetables? How come some people can roll their tongues and other people can't? Where did Mr. Klutz's hair go? Why does the moon look bigger than the sun? I can't take it anymore, Mr. Docker shouted. Then he ran out of the room. His head wasn't even on fire, but it was cool anyway. Chapter 12. The worst moment of my life. We had to let Andrea sit with us in the vomitorium because I was still being nice to her. My mom packed me a jelly sandwich because it was meatloaf day and I hate meatloaf. I love meatloaf, said Andrea. It goes so well with mashed potatoes. What a waste, I thought, looking at Andrea's mashed potatoes. Those potatoes could be powering someone's car or washing machine. Suddenly, Mr. Klutz came running into the vomitorium. Has anybody seen Mr. Docker? Asked Mr. Klutz. He ran away again. Everybody looked at me. AJ drove him crazy, said Andrea, the big tattletale. He asked Mr. Docker so many questions that he went running out of the room. It's not my fault, I said. Mr. Docker was crazy long before I got to him. It is too your fault. Is not. We went back and forth like that for a while. Finally, I got sick of listening to Andrea. I scooped up some of her mashed potatoes and mashed them right on top of her head. Ha ha ha! Eek! Andrea screamed. I'm covered in potatoes. So is her face, I yelled. Andrea got up and stood in her chair. Hey, everybody, she yelled. I have an announcement. I know what AJ stands for. AJ stands for Arlo Jervis. No, she said it. I couldn't believe she actually said it out loud. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I had to think fast. So I did the only thing I could do. I ran out of the vomitorium. I ran out of the school. I ran home. And that's where I'm going to stay for the rest of my life. Maybe after 1,100,000 years go by, everybody will forget that AJ stands for Arlo Jervis. Maybe then I'll be able to go back to school and face my friends again. Maybe then I'll be able to return to a normal life. But it won't be easy.